You are now listening to Stranger Times.
Hello and welcome to Stranger Times. I'm your host, Jacob Carson, and today we are joined by James Ian Dola, creator and host of Engaging the Phenomenon. It's Ian Doley, not Ian Dola, sorry.
Ah,
There you go. I spoke to you just before as well to get it right, and then I got it wrong when I was saying it. Yeah, man, how you doing? It's nice to finally speak to you. I've been following you for a while now.
yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, man. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on and correcting my name.
No
that's
worries.
that's one that gets everybody. Even Andy from that UFO podcast. I talked to him right before the podcast, and it's just it's Italian. There's too many vowels in it. It's counterintuitive.
I watched that episode. I think I made the same mistake as him as well. I think we both asked you before it went off, and then just say the wrong thing on the moment. But I guess that's what it is when you see that little red button light up, then you know it's live. It's just
Yeah, I called my guest. His name's Andrew. I called him Andrew. I had Andrew Bustamante on, and the next sentence I called him Andre. I had to apologize. you know,
yeah. No, I
uh,
get you. I get you. It's well, we got there in the end. But to kind of kickstart this off, for any of my listeners that might not have heard or seen what engaging the phenomenon is all about, what exactly is it, and why did you start it? Because I know you started off on YouTube. I've been doing some of my research this week because I originally found you on Spotify. I think my two favorite episodes were Jay with Project Unity, and then the one that you did with Richard Dolan. And kind of since then, I've gone on and listened to all of the other ones with like Luis Elizondo and stuff. But I went back this week and had a look at like the beginnings of your YouTube channel because I just wanted to get a bit of an understanding of why you started it and everything. And I thought it was interesting. I like seeing the growth path that you've come on as well because it's you can see right at the start you're very passionate about this, but as you go on, you kind of meet more people and your like discussion becomes much more kind of like compacted and like ready to go. But yeah, the floor is yours. What exactly is engaging the phenomenon?
yeah, sure. And thanks for embarrassing me. No, I'm kidding. Those older videos. It's funny as you say to see that growth path, but engaging the phenomenon. Um, I guess you could say actually it's a more updated version of my work. I've been in the field of, I guess you could say UFOs and contact for quite a number of years. And so engaging the phenomenon is kind of like a revision and culmination of my work over the years. So I started off early on. I was always interested in UFOs. I had contact experiences. So I knew that was, to me, it was a central part of the UFO subject was actually contact. And with that, in my own experience, I went on to explore CE5, and I created I created the first CE5 social networking groups um, on Facebook, and was instrumental in getting a lot of the CE5 working groups kind of like in communication with each other and collaborating. Um, so engaging the phenomenon is kind of my way of presenting um, and carrying on the conversation about UFOs in an inclusive way that includes things like CE5 and psi and high strangeness with typical ufology. And I hate to say that, but ufology is somewhat split up into camps.
Yeah.
Not really intentionally, I think. I mean, people tend to vibe with who they vibe with, and they are in these little camps, and I get that. I mean, everybody kind of does it to some extent. You have your main group of researchers that you kind of mingle with and trade information with. It's natural, that you kind of are working on a kind of topic with somebody in UFOs, so you're speaking with them and sharing information. So that kind of happens naturally. But I wanted to cast a wider net and include things like CE5 and contact into that picture more prominently as part of the subject. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what engaging the phenomenon is.
I like it. I like it because I think as well you mentioned in a few of your like earlier videos as well, like it kind of has like two meanings, isn't it? You've got like the side to it with engaging the phenomenon, which is like actually establishing like conscious like contact almost through like CE5 and stuff. And then there's also like the other digital aspect to it where it's like you're engaging with other people and having them talk and promote, and you don't necessarily have to be a researcher. You can be just someone in the field that can like shine light on something, or if you have a passion in it or an interest, or like you were saying, like a journalist or a blogger or a photographer. And I think that's really cool too. I really vibe with that because that's something that I found really like interesting about this like group of people, as you're saying, because even though everybody's like in little different camps and have like different ideologies and opinions on what it is, for the most part people are quite like welcoming on the subject when they're new to it, and you find people that get into it are usually quite passionate as well. And it's unfortunate that it does have some of the stigma surrounding it where their passion kind of gets like diminished because of what certain people's opinions are or certain people's beliefs are. And I can really appreciate when anybody's like goes out of their way to like engage with the phenomenon, as cheesy as that might sound, because it's like it's good and it kind of creates like a paradigm shift where more people can do it. And if you can change someone's views or opinions or ideologies, they can go on and affect loads of other humans' opinions, views, and ideologies. And I think you want that paradigm shift almost. So it's like hugely respectable.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, engaging the phenomenon. I mean, to engage the phenomenon, you don't have to go out and do field work necessarily. You can be somebody like Diana Pasulka, who engaged it in an academic way
Yeah.
and was studying the religious and philosophical implications of the UFO. You can be somebody like Dr. Gary Nolan, who's studying different areas of the brain that interpret intuitive information and study the materials on a almost like a atomic level
Yeah.
and of the materials that come from some of these objects, or Jacques Vallée, who was studying the social impact of it, and so on. So all these different people, UFO Jesus, Danny Silva.
Yeah.
Well, we're all engaging the phenomenon in our own way, and I think that's the way forward. Is everybody kind of bringing what they have to the table to move the conversation forward, and every different person is going to have their own unique audience and way of discussing the topic that's equally important and impactful. Because I'm not gonna, I can't, no matter what I say or do or however I dress up, I'm never getting to UFO Jesus level. I'm not gonna be able to to do what UFO Jesus does. Only UFO Jesus can do what UFO Jesus does, right?
Yeah.
And I love it. Danny Silva, he has his really, citizen journal aspect, and he's, really doing a fantastic job with that. He's broke stories like 6 months to a year before mainstream media finally had to follow up, because it became relevant in the mainstream news, and so and then there's just all those different approaches, and they're reaching different audiences, and that's having, again, like this quantum chain effect that you can't really predict, but it sets off a whole series of events that gets different people involved in the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I can't remember what study it was, and it's a little bit unrelated to this, but I remember watching something in a documentary, even when they were talking about people that like practice like mindfulness, for instance. And
Oh yeah.
if you like situate those kinds of people in certain areas of like a town or a city, like crime rates can go down because it's like you're saying, it like creates like a shift in consciousness
Right,
almost.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
you can do
actually,
it
yeah.
with this kind of thing too.
Right, exactly. Well, and see, and that's where you get into the kind of CE5 consciousness aspect of things. I think that there is something to be said about that, and that was called the Maharishi effect, and it was actually a study done by the Transcendental Meditation group, and they're getting small groups of people together, and doing getting to coherent states of elevated awareness and meditation using TM. But that you're getting into like 100th monkey effect territory and morphogenetic field territory when you're talking about that. Which I actually think there's something to that, all that stuff, and I kind of that's kind of how CE5 works, in my opinion, is to that consciousness aspect.
So did you have any experience or sighting before you started like practicing like CE5 and stuff, or did it all come after you started like
Oh
practicing?
yeah. I got into CE5 because I had I guess you can say like a series of events. Um, I had contact, or weird phenomenological stuff happen to me early on in my life. Um, you know, and encounters with entities and stuff, out of body experiences where even when I was in like first, second grade, I remember really extremely vividly, and I never forgot it, like several out of body experiences. Um, and those always remain significant to me. So in that sense, my awareness and my consciousness was always open to metaphysics, I guess, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. Um, but then, and again, I was always into UFOs. So even then, I was, in my teen years, I was studying UFOs and stuff like that. Um, but then when in around 2007, I had a series of kind of like in your face contact events that occurred that led me to CE5. And when those events occurred, and again, there's a series of events. I can go into some of them if you like.
Yeah, go for it.
And okay, yeah. So it starts. The first one that actually occurred is I did a video on my YouTube channel. It's called Dreamtime Contact is the video, and it was really bizarre. It gets into the high strangeness of what is considered UFO contact. That's noted by Dr. Jalen Hynek and Jacques Vallée. So I was working an overnight one night, and towards the end of my shift, is early in the morning. I'm talking to one of my coworkers, and he's a really kind of skeptical guy. We talking about family and things like that, because he's not into all the
Yeah.
kind of consciousness or UFOs or anything like that. So we never talked about anything like that. And out of nowhere, he just says, "Hey, did you hear about these UFOs in Mexico?" And I was like, it kind of caught me off guard, and I was like, no, and I didn't hear about it. Um, so then I kind of thought to myself, that's strange, but whatever. I go home, uh, I go to bed, and I have this insane lucid dream. Like I could feel the sensations in my body the whole time in the dream and everything. Of in my dream, I'm driving down an old street that I used to live on, and there's a UFO like hovering 20 feet above my car, and it's actually quite big. It's bigger than the car, and it's like this electric orange plasma, and it's like sending all these volts and shocks through my body and humming. And I'm in my dream, so I'm super reactive. I'm not thinking about why this is happening or anything.
Yeah.
I'm just like trying to get away from this object. And I'm trying to go get away from it, and I can't get away from it. It's just like wherever I go, it's like hovering right over me. And then I snap out of the dream after a few minutes of this occurring. And I'm gathering. I wake up, and I'm kind of gathering myself, and like you're just waking up and
Yeah.
trying to, yeah. And so somebody, one of my family members, walks to my house. That they get home from work, and they say, "Hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico?" And I'm like, frig this,
Yeah.
screw all this shit. I need to get the hell out of here, because now this is too weird. Because at that point, this all those series of events to me were they, over, they were too coincidental and overwhelming, in a sense where I was like, screw the hell, all this.
Yeah.
So I go outside to get my car, and there's this Chinese food place down the street. So I'm like, I'm just gonna go over there, chill, get some Chinese food, and relax, and kind of like gather myself. And I get in my car, and I drive like 200 feet, and just like dead center where I'm headed and where I'm going, right in the center of sky, is this fireball. And it's actually, it's pretty big relative to like a star or planet or
Yeah.
anything like that. So it's either quite low or massively large. But I kind of get the sense that it was like lower in proximity. So it's completely stationary, and I'm looking at it, and as soon as I think in my head that's an effing UFO, it starts to move because it was completely stationary, and I'm like, holy, I'm freaking out at this point. Um, and again, the sighting itself was again, this fireball in the sky, which is ominous to begin with, but it really what hit me like a ton of bricks was the entire series of events that occurred leading to that. So I try to chase the object. It just goes off, and it gets out of my field of view, and I couldn't chase it anymore because I couldn't see. I tried to go in that direction, couldn't find it. Um, but I was able to keep my eyes on it for maybe 2 3 minutes before it got out of my view, and it just again, this fireball, there's no trail, and it's just moving through the sky in broad daylight. um and that was the end of that event. And to me, that was majorly impactful.
Yeah.
um but then after that had occurred, a few months later, I had this car accident, and in the car accident, at the time I thought it was a near death experience, but it was actually what I now call a trauma induced out of body experience, because I wasn't really on the brink of death or anything, but I had this experience where I was in this car accident, and when that happened, I lost you know consciousness in the way that we think of it,
Yeah.
and I was in almost like a parallel reality consciousness. And um it started with this kind of weird experience of experiencing time, like present, past, future at the same time. And I saw this light entity, um, right directly in front of me, and for some reason, I got the sense when I was face to face with this being that it was part of me somehow.
Yeah.
That's I don't know how to explain it other than that. It was not separate from me. That's kind of, to me, I kind of, in that state, I knew that as a matter of fact. That again, that's just my perspective. I don't know, you know. Um, so then, and there was this kind of experience I had like that, and then I was just out of nowhere. I just was above the scene of the accident after that. Like, it just, I guess you could say, it just flipped to that. My perception was I was above the accident, and I was looking down on it, and I saw like the fire trucks and ambulance and all that kind of stuff. And in my mind, I'm thinking, so this is it. I was aware enough to think, okay, like, okay, I guess I'm done, and I was completely at peace and cool with it. It was so weird, but extremely transformative. Um, and then, I woke up. I ended up waking up right after that, and I'm in the hospital bed, and all that, and coming to, and um, and that actually occurred in the same exact area I saw that fireball,
Oh, okay.
which is really weird.
Yeah.
But then the following day, and this is really where everything kicked off for me. So the following day, I'm in my room, I'm cleaning my room, I'm just like grateful to be alive. It's no, it's around 9 o'clock at night, I believe. It's dark, it's in the summer, and I get what people would call like a telepathic lock on slash download. I'm just in there cleaning, and then all of a sudden I get a voice throughout my entire body. I can feel the voice through my body. So that's the only way I can describe it. And it says, "Come outside." But as soon as it said, "Come outside," I instantly knew like everything that was going on.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to go outside, and there's going to be a craft, and this whole contact thing was going to take place. So I ran outside, and I got past to where the trees were kind of like over the house,
Yeah.
and as I'm running there, I can hear the humming, and I look straight up, and there's like a hexagonal craft just right above the trees. which it couldn't be more than 80 feet. And it's just making a very low hum and moving over across, just over me. And I'm, you know, there's a few lights around the edge, and in the center, there's kind of like this square of white light. And then it instantly disappeared, and then it reappeared, um, right across the street where there's this lake, um, probably about 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet away. And at that point, a few other crafts appeared. So there would be two or three at once, and it had this like these spinning lights on it, multicolored lights. And I'm really uh, freaking out at this point, because I'm thinking, like, did I just like hit my head so hard in that
Yeah.
accident that I'm imagining this, or is this really happening? So I ran to my house. I got two of my family members, and I said, "You got to come outside. You got to come outside." They're like, "Why?" I said, "They're here." They're like, "Who's here?" I said, "Just come out."
Yeah.
And they came out, and they saw this, and this whole event took place over almost a half an hour, and there'd be different crafts appearing and disappearing with these lights spinning around it. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, this is disclosure, like this is happening right now, it's going to be all over the news. um I for some reason I was thinking that like everybody was seeing
Yeah.
this. I was just my first, like, I was thinking, like, who could not see this? It's right over this lake, and it's not an unpopulated area. There's different houses and stuff
Yeah.
around, and stores. Um, so the whole event ended with these two crafts moving towards each other, and they had the lights spinning around them. And as soon as they're about to crash, I'm thinking in my head, "Holy shit, they're going to crash!" They both just disappeared, and the entire sky was just blank, and that was that. And the event was just over. And I that that whole series of events, I kind of see as one like clip in my life. And when that happened, I felt I needed to find answers. Like, I was almost on a mission of
Yeah.
sorts. Like, I had to, number one, find the truth, and number two, communicate the truth. And I actually, the impression I got from these contacts, and especially the last one, for whatever reason, was that this intelligence wanted people to know that they are here, like, visiting this planet, or if they're from this planet or whatever. Um, like, that's the impression that I got. And that actually led me to finding the CE5 work. So shortly after that, I found the Disclosure Project, and I was like amazed. Like, you have all these top level witnesses, and I had actually seen clips of it before on YouTube. Just, I think, yeah, it was YouTube, just randomly. And I didn't. Uh, I had never seen the full thing, and I don't know why I didn't search for it, but for the first time, I saw the full Disclosure Project, and I'm like, who is this guy? He's like directing this event, and it was Dr. Stephen Greer, and I had never heard of him. And at that point, I was already familiar with like Stanton Friedman, Joe Mars, and kind of like UFO researchers of that time,
Yeah.
but not Stephen Greer. So I'm like, who is this guy? He's like directing this huge event. And I'm looking into his work, and I find that, I watched the whole Disclosure Project, and then I saw the CE5 stuff. I'm like, what is this? And he's talking about CSETI and CE5, and contact with UFO intelligence, and the way that it happens. And at that point, I was kind of blown away, because the way he was describing contact, I'd never heard anybody talk about that like it that way before. Number one. Number two, what he was describing exactly paralleled what I experienced. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this guy's speaking from a point of knowledge, because this is not something you can guess at or just make up. The way he was explaining it was in a way of somebody who had experienced it. That was clear to me. So I started following his work. I read his books, and I listened to some of his material. I found like the CSETI working group training materials and all that stuff, and I started doing CE5 on a daily basis, because I mean, this is like a life mission for me at this
Yeah.
point. I had just had these series of extraordinary contact events, and I was very motivated to kind of get to the bottom of it. So that's how I ended up finding CE5, and then just shortly after, studying it and studying it and practicing it on a daily basis, I um, I started the first CE5 groups on Facebook to connect with other CE5ers and field working groups, and just to share information, see who else is out there, see who
Yeah.
else is doing the work, see what kind of experiences that they were having or have had. um, and that actually took off very well. And because CSETI at that time had a forum, and it was really kind of bland, and not many people were participating. And I said, I know there's more to it than this.
Yeah.
And so the CE5 Facebook groups really took off, and I ended up getting all the, or most of the CE5 working group leaders and groups and participants on there, and I was able to connect with them. And I ended up going to two CSETI events, and then having my own CE5 events with those different CE5 members from Facebook, and the working group people from around the country in the US. And I had a lot of great experiences meeting with them and doing the CE5 field work at that point.
Interesting. That's like a fascinating story. That's like proper blowing my mind. I think you're like, that's definitely like the most interesting like sighting / experience that I've had as like a guest on this show so far, because I think we like with Andy McGrillen from that UFO podcast and Graham Rendell from UAP Media UK, they've like seen things and had lights, but a few experiences, but not things like one after another. And this is something that I find really, really interesting, because like there's this whole like theory and idea as well, isn't there, that maybe sometimes these experiences are just happening to you like consciously, like they might not like physically be happening, but you might be like consciously kind of like seeing it, if that makes sense. And all this stuff just like absolutely, I'm so interested in it, because like I've mentioned this quite a lot, but I've just gone full circle. Like I really did believe growing up that like science had all of the answers. Humanity knew what we were doing, and we were going to like spread out into the stars and become like this spacefaring race. And like the older that I've got, I've just realized that like, not that we're primitive, but we're getting there. And we've gone down such a physical route in science as to like the whole metaphysics consciousness like aspect of it, that like the possibilities are almost endless. And like when I've been listening to your podcast and you've been talking about like contact modalities and all of that kind of stuff, it's really like, it's not put like the dots together for me, but like I've always said like growing up that I believe that like the whole like ghost thing or spirit thing or remote viewing thing or even the UAP phenomenon, they're all connected somehow. And as we're like learning now with like science, with like quantum physics and stuff, how like consciousness can like physically affect reality too if it's being observed or something like that, I think we're slowly learning that this is like, it's as important as like standard, like the standard model of sciences, for instance. And it makes me wonder, because I do sometimes think that maybe, because when you always hear like that conversation or like that argument that, oh well, why don't we see anything nowadays, why don't we always see anything, like when you have like the argument of like civilizations in the past seeing it more often, or like the idea that like Egypt or the Aztecs or stuff were like really in tune with like celestial bodies. And when I say that, I mean more like planets and stuff, just like the cosmic clock that they had and the ability to know when like certain constellations were moving. Like, where did they get that knowledge and stuff? I often do wonder if maybe they went more down a like metaphysics route and understanding than like the physical route that we've gone down now. And maybe both are as equally like game changing, but they just produce different results, kind of thing. Because that would totally make sense for like us as a species. Because when you're hearing like what Luis Elizondo and people have to say about like, I can't remember what you called it now when you're asking him in the interview, but like like conscious.
Cognitive human
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
cognitive human interface.
yeah, and stuff like that. It's like I can totally see that being like something in the future, and like when what we're learning from like quantum mechanics and stuff too. And it's just so interesting, and I can just imagine that this kind of like area, it's got so much to offer like for the future, and it's so exciting.
Well, yeah, well, actually, that was the entire focus of ATIP,
Yeah,
and we're talking about slide next, ATIP slide 9, the briefing slides. On the bottom, there was a note. It said, what was science fiction is now quantum physics
yeah,
or quantum mechanics." And you know, ATIP's study, all those papers that were put together, it wasn't like, oh, random stuff. It was stuff that they said, this is technology we want to develop within the next 50 years. So they were observing all this UAP stuff and said, can we produce and replicate this technology in 50 years?
yeah,
So that's what OSAP and ATIP were aiming to do. And again, you had the cognitive human interface, trans medium travel, including going through solid objects, and all these kind of like uh, dissemblement of of objects and stuff, like really kind of like sci-fi-ish type ideas, but stuff nonetheless that they observed while studying the UFO phenomenon, through ATIP and OSAP. And it's funny that you mentioned before that you know is is this like a just a consciousness thing? And in some of my experiences, there were several other witnesses to some of these events. Um, so they were able to see it too. But coming up on my podcast later next week, I'm going to have Dr. Joseph Burks,
okay,
and he's going to talk about the virtual experiencer model, because I don't think it's a thing of either or.
yeah,
I think that there are real physical objects that are appearing and interacting in a very physical way, in the sense that we think of physical reality.
yeah,
But there's also the ability that UFO intelligence has to influence and manipulate our consciousness and our awareness, and kind of make us be able to see and think things as well. So there's both,
yeah,
and Jacques Vallée talks about the absurdity of some of these things, where one person will see something and the other person will see the opposite thing, and they're right next to each other. And apparently the UFO intelligence has the ability to do that. And also in the ATIP slides, one of the things it says is that the UAP phenomenon possibly has the ability to influence the mind of decision makers. It's like, what are they talking about? It's just like, and again, this was a Pentagon study. They were looking at these things seriously, and from a national security kind of paradigm of like, what are we dealing with basically? So I think it's kind of it's all of the above. I think we're dealing with all these kind of things, and I think people think, oh, like hooey, psychic phenomenon, and or what they call in some government studies anomalous mental phenomena, where they're able to observe things like telepathy, remote viewing, and things of that nature. I mean, I think all of it is going to be satisfied by science eventually,
yeah,
via scientific method. It's just a matter of getting there and understanding it. The problem is, and I think maybe Dean Radin has talked about this, and Dean Radin has done some phenomenal work, no pun intended, on the psychic phenomena. But he said, like, okay, so if you observe something, empirically, and you don't have them, if you can't explain the mechanism of how it works, science wants to throw it away.
yeah,
I mean, but that's insane, because if you're, observing something like repeatedly, um, you know, there's got to be something to it, right? But some of the psychic research was not taken as seriously, because they didn't have like a modus operandi explaining how it was happening, and that was kind of the weak point of the research. Even though they had, there's a lot of research done on psychic phenomenon. That's actually very good. Actually, if you look at the percentages and numbers, it's well beyond anything of chance.
yeah,
But because they can't say it works because of X, Y, Z, some scientists won't take it as seriously. But I think we are going to come full circle, and I think the UAP subject is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
I think because you have the physicality of the UFO, and we're talking not just like, oh wow, that psychic phenomenon. It seems like some of it's technological.
Yeah.
So I think that's right. That's like, again, where the rubber meets the road. You have the physical and the non-physical, coalescing, and I think we're going to find a lot of answers there. And for some people, that's even like the stepping stone, or kind of like the epiphany, or the rubber meets the road aspect of spirituality for some people too.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think that whole aspect of it too is really interesting, like this idea of like consciously aided technology. And you were saying before how like two people in the same place that have an experience can see something like different too. That I find interesting because like when you look throughout like history, and I'm talking like far back now too, whenever we saw things in the sky, it would be like a ball of fire or like a chariot in the sky or like a dragon or something. And I've often wondered that if maybe this could be the same like UAP phenomenon, but it's just presenting itself in a way to the beings of that time that would be able to deal with it in a manner that isn't too like hostile or anything like that. And
Yeah.
I find it interesting too with like the whole like psyche kind of thing, because I was reading about just like evolution with like mammals and stuff, and they were saying how like because humans went down the route of like having a mouth and being able to like physically make noise when we communicate, maybe like other species, instead of having to like evolve to make noise, they might go down the road of like telekinesis or something like that. And what's interesting about like humans also in that aspect is that the ability to go like with physical speaking means that we also have like the ability to lie. And that also represents like a lot of problems within our society too, because we were all like mind reading each other, there would be no like BS like up front. You know what I mean? You'd understand someone's intentions straight off the bat. And I find all these things interesting because is the phenomenon like just another race, for instance, that has had more time to evolve than we are, and they had the same route as us, they just got there later, or are they coming from like a completely different evolutionary background to us and they had that from the start? These are all like the kind of things that I find like super super interesting. But one of my things that I really wanted to ask you, because you're obviously researching it quite a lot with CE5, is do you believe that like can anybody do it, or is it more so like you have to be in a group, or certain people are just like naturally better at it than others? Because I really want to believe, and I practice like mindfulness and meditation, not as much as I could, but I would say I practice it quite a lot more than like the average person. And I've gone out and like tried to like practice CE5 and initiate stuff, and I've just never had an experience. And I don't know, maybe if they can tell my intentions are too much, and I'm like, just show me something, or if I'm doing it wrong, or what it could be. But I'm just really interested in that aspect of it, because you find some certain people don't have to really practice it and have natural things straight off the bat, and then other people practice it and they eventually lead to things. That's why I was kind of interested when I asked you at the start if you'd have seen anything before. But yeah, what's your kind of thoughts on that? Is it something that you can train, kind of thing?
It's something you can train. It's just like anything else. It's it it's a skill that can be improved. Um, just like anybody could lift weights,
Yeah.
right? Uh, Literally, anybody could go up and pick something up. Yeah, the intensity in which you train is going to be part of the equation, and how far you can progress and
Yeah.
lift heavier weight or lift more. So that's part of it. There's certainly a talent, I guess you can say, that some people will have an affinity for it. Some people just have natural abilities for any different skill.
Yeah.
There's kids that are mathematical prodigies, like at the age of 4 and 5. They're doing these insane equations, and their parents don't have that ability.
Yeah.
They're just prodigies. Um, So there's that entire spectrum. Most people are are just I guess you can say most people will be able to do this. Will be able to do something like CE5 with continual practice, just like mindfulness or meditation.
Yeah.
Um, again, there's different ways of doing mindfulness and meditation. Um, but let's just say for somebody that their goal with meditation or mindfulness is to reach a samadhi state. You know, you're first of all, the first 20 times
Yeah.
they might not even reach a real meditative state, as you would learn after years of training. Like, okay, this is meditation. They're thinking about, am I thinking too much? I'm not supposed to think. Am I, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. And they don't realize actually what the meditative state is, so they're missing it in kind of context.
Yeah.
Is one thing. And again, if the goal of some people's meditation is samadhi, it doesn't mean that you're going to hit that samadhi. You're going to hit nirvikalpa samadhi every time you meditate either.
Yeah.
You know, so and for some people, they could just, for whatever reason, I don't know, in some different traditions they'll say it's part of your karma or whatever. They could sit down and within the first month of meditation practice really reach some profound states. Or you can have some people that it will take them months, of serious training to actually reach that point of where they hit like a samadhi super conscious state.
Yeah.
And there could be a million different reasons why that is, like your previous experience, conditioning, and all those kind of factors. So there's a lot of different variables that are kind of moving parts that are unpredictable. The general person, if they go out and they're seriously trying to do it genuinely and regularly, kind of like within so it's not just like you go out once this 1 month and then a month later you try, and a consistent practice where you're going out 2-3 times a week, for a few hours each time. The likelihood that you're going to have an encounter is high.
Yeah.
you know um, there's also the aspect of the phenomenon, right? So it's actually George Knapp just had on these people, the orb summoners, and they're actually really cool people. I spoke to them, um, but I don't like the idea of using the word summon, because you're not summoning. It's
Yeah.
an invitation, and if you're the idea of summoning, I think that's the wrong attitude to go at it. It's an invitation for contact, um, and you know the phenomenon is part of the equation. So um if something doesn't occur, it's not necessarily like, oh man, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
It's is the phenomenon able to respond, or we that's the kind of unknown variable of, we can't really guess as to, oh, why they can't come. Dr. Stephen Greer sometimes has said, oh well, it's because the cabal and the secret military have weapons that can take them down, so they're not going to appear all the time. That's kind of his kind of explanation for that. But I'm just going to go with, we simply don't know.
Yeah.
uh, there's also the non-locality aspect, where you might be doing a CE5. Just say you sit down for one day, you do 10 hours of CE5, you do meditation field work for 10 hours straight, and you see nothing, right? And then later in the week or the next week, you're just out, you get out of the gym, you're going to your car, and you just have a profound sighting, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to happen with an acute effect.
Yeah.
So people need to be aware of that as well, is where you could do like a week of CE5 and see nothing, and the next week you do no CE5 or meditation or anything like that, and the sighting occurs. And you can say there's like a quantum lag or something. I don't know. Maybe that's, they're going to the phenomenon is going to produce the encounter when they see a spit. I don't have the answer for that as to why that is, but it's something that has repeatedly happened, not just to me, but to many other people. So if somebody's interested in doing C5, I would say, you know, you have to take it as a like a serious endeavor or practice, just as if you were trying to lift heavier weight or whatever it is, and have, you know, do a little practice every day or at least once or twice a week, um, for a few months, if you're doing it once or twice a week. And I'd say that the likelihood that you're gonna see something if you're giving a genuine effort is gonna be, pretty good.
Can I ask you then as well? Does it make a difference then if you're in a group or you're with an extra person? Like, does it help like magnify it, or does that not really matter and it's kind of just based off your conscious
Okay,
intentions?
yeah, that's a great question, and it depends on the individual. So there's a few variables with this too. Like for me, I do exceptionally well on my own. And I maybe it's because I'm kind of introverted to
Yeah.
begin with. So I like to do things on my own, just naturally. Um, so I have great success doing it alone. Some people, um, they either don't want to do it alone or they feel they need other people to support to make them powerful enough or something to do it. But you could absolutely do it alone. You can absolutely do it with a group. I'd say with a group requires more practice because you have to get those different people somewhat on the same page. So there needs to be some kind of coherence in the group, and it's not always predictable, um, of the people that you get together. But I if you get there are certain groups of people when you get like two or three of the right people together, where some incredible stuff happens. Um, so you could do it alone or you can do it with a group. Both require equal practice. So if you're doing it with a group, that same group of people should get together and practice it together, um, to kind of see the results of that. Because there has to be kind of like a tuning, almost like like a tuning fork.
Yeah.
You need that kind of coherence, I think, to be highly effective. Um, but there's a kind of weird thing where if you get the right people together, it's almost like magic. And I hate to use that word, but there's one person, um, where whenever I would do a CE5 with just me and them, it was astronomical, really profound experiences. And I could say it's coherence. That would be my best guess. Um, but I can't say for certain. But so you c both are good.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're with a group of people, you have witnesses. Um, but there's also the kind of idea of like if you have that one person in the group who thinks everything's a UFO, that's that could be a setback in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
So
It's in.
there's
Oh, gone.
yeah, go ahead,
I
go
was,
ahead,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say it's kind of interesting, really, because if you just like break it down, just like as an observer, like say if you could look down on the universe, it's weird because like if consciousness is cropping up all over the universe, kind of thing, or if it's all coming from like one place, wherever that be, based off your like spirituality, religion, or whatever it is that you, even if you subscribe to like simulation theory and some developers coded the whole thing, like if you come from this idea that like maybe consciousness is something and like our brains maybe like an antenna and it taps into it and you get a little bit of it, or you can go down the other route where it's like a giant sea and you're just like a little raindrop kind of thing, and so on. But it's kind of interesting when you think about it from those kind of like points, because effectively it's like consciousness would be like cropping up all over the universe with like different species and stuff, and that's like the way to contact each other too, but no one knows each other or knows of like each other's story or their technological capability, but we all use the same method of like contact. And I find that interesting too, because like their technologies and stuff that they're displaying, that would effectively mean too that it is essentially ours, because all consciousness might come from the same place. They're just further along than we are, or we're like further behind than they are, kind of thing. But it's all kind of like this sharing thing. And I find that interesting because a lot of it does come with like good intentions, doesn't it? Like, obviously, if everybody's
Yes. Yeah.
got terrible intentions, no one's going to show up. But thinking that too, I wonder, like you were saying with the quantum lag and like kind of like joking around with like how it takes some time sometimes. I wonder, like, based off how big the universe is, if there are species out there that are just reacting to conscious like initiation, there must be like billions of planets kind of at a similar stage that we are, and they must be doing it on like uncomprehendable scales. Do you know what I mean? Like some species, if
Oh
they're
man, yeah.
reaching out, there must be like billions and billions and billions and billions of people that they're reaching out because they're trying CE5 or something similar in their terms, kind of thing. And I just
Yeah.
wonder, because like we would do that. Do you know what I mean? If we got
Yeah.
to a technological level where we could like scan consciousness and stuff, we would keep an eye on like lower life forms in the universe. And if they started displaying a certain level of technology, we'd pop over and have a look, or we'd be interested if they were figuring out ways to communicate. And I just find it really interesting because like we're on the receiving end at the moment, but you could totally see that that's what we would do if we were in that position.
Yeah. Wow, man, you just opened up a whole cosmological discussion, because I mean there's so much to what you just said there. Um, number one, some UFO intelligence just seems to be here.
Yeah.
There's daily encounters and sightings on this planet for whatever reason with UFO intelligence. Um, and in my own impression and guess would be that we're dealing with several different phenomena, and some of this might be beings that are 1,000 years ahead of us, some that are 100,000 years ahead of us. Some of these entities described in UFO encounters and other maybe even spiritual encounters may be entities that are so evolved that they don't need technology to interact with us that way, right?
Yeah.
So there's an entire cosmology that could you can ascribe to some of this stuff in a sense, um, where like when people say like a being like an angel or a light being or something, that being might not necessarily need technology,
Yeah.
in the way that we think of it. They could be so consciously evolved. And again, there might be intelligences that are more compatible with us, right?
Yeah.
And that have a similar evolution trajectory, and they kind of evolved in the same kind of sentience way. And that kind of gets into Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields,
Okay.
and kind of like where things have the universe has a blueprint for things that work, like um and that's kind of it's makes me laugh in a way there where people kind of like say, oh well, there's no life out there, kind of like there's no other kind of intelligent, even humanoid beings out there, right? They said, if there's aliens, they would have evolved in different ways and we wouldn't be able to recognize them. And while I do think there's some merit to that, in the same sense, like, okay, well, all planets are round, right? All suns are, the same shape.
Yeah.
So there's something to say about gravitational forces and evolution, and the way that, the universe to some degree, not in every instance, has a blueprint,
Yeah.
for existence, for life. So that might explain some, again, humanoid type beings that are reported in different contact things, and that's not to mention like all the crazy theories like parallel universes and time travel and things like that. But yeah, there's so much that we could go off of from that. It's just it's really fascinating to think about, and I think the UFO subject kind of really in a way pushes our thinking to the edges of our perception through some of those kind of contemplations, because it just opens everything up for possibility.
No, I'd agree with you. And I think that's what makes it so much fun too. Like this subject is just, it's so consuming. Like once you start looking into it, there's so many different areas and like different routes and different phenomenon and different like bits that you can kind of go into and contribute your bit to. And I think that's what I love about it so much, like getting into it recently, is just like nobody actually has the answer, and everybody's kind of just trying to figure it out, or like put their little brick into the final completion kind of thing, and just help out where they can. And I think that we are in a bit of a paradigm shift, and I do feel that like it's changing for the better. I still think we're a little bit a way out of it yet, and I think like with technologies and stuff, like I was saying this in the last episode to Vinny from Disclosure Team, that like people sometimes think that like everything will change overnight if this happens, and it will take like 50 to 100 years to implement these technologies and change ideologies in government and the way that we operate and all this kind of stuff. And these kind of things and like these kind of discussions and stuff I love, because it's like you're saying, the possibilities are endless, and just having that discussion can like set off a light bulb in your brain or somebody listening, and that could completely change their path now, and they could spend the rest of their life researching into it or looking into a specific like part of it. And I think that's what's so cool about it, is like there's just so many avenues, as like you were saying.
Yeah, and I love there was this Jacques Vallée quote. I made a little graphic for it. I make some on engaging the phenomenon on like Instagram and Twitter and stuff. I made all these like graphics of different quotes, and one of them is by Jacques Vallée, and I love Jacques Vallée's work because he is always like pushing at the edge of kind of like thought experiments and possibilities, and taking almost like an unconventional position that makes that it broadens the frame
Yeah.
of the conversation, and it's like a great thought experiment. And I forget the exact quote, but he says like the UFO reality is so kind of profound, um, but there's also something very physically real about it.
Yeah.
you know so there it's it really pushes our perceptions to the edge, and even broadens our imagination in a sense, but it's still very physically real. There's physical objects and there's technology involved.
Yeah.
So it's not just kind of like this spiritual idea or spiritual quest or metaphysical thing.
Yeah.
There's a very physically real component, that it's technological as well. So again, that's in my mind, that's kind of where it brings everything together and where the rubber meets the road. You have this kind of psychic phenomenon aspect that's discussed in the 1950s in the Wilbert Smith memo,
Yeah.
where they're talking about that the UFO subject is more classified than the hydrogen bomb,
Yeah.
which is the ultimate doomsday weapon of the day. So it's more classified. The UFO subject's more classified than the human's ultimate weapon, and it involves anomalous mental phenomenon and psychic phenomenon, mental phenomenon. But again, then you have this idea of crash retrievals in bodies. So uh, it's like a bit of everything.
Mm.
You have something for the nuts and bolts people, something for the spiritual people, something for the people that are interested in the psychic phenomenon. It's got everything.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, and especially like now as well, like moving into the age of like quantum mechanics and quantum physics, with everything that we're like learning and doing now, like it's really cool that we're seeing like patterns in that too with this phenomenon. So it's just really interesting. But we are coming up on time. So have you got anything that you want to promote with engaging the phenomenon? Anything that you got coming up where people can catch you on
Um,
socials?
yeah, I mean, you can find Engaging the Phenomenon on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Um, I do have a lot of interesting things coming up. I'm going to be doing some live panels soon.
Cool.
I'm going to have more on the podcast. So there'll be some great discussions going forward. Even next week, I have two really good things coming up. But I do have some projects that I'm working for long term that I may announce soon. We'll see. They're
Okay.
kind of long term projects, so I don't want to get ahead of myself in that sense.
No,
But
that's fine.
thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate what you're doing and kind of like putting this out there. And in a way, you're engaging the phenomenon in the way that you're doing this podcast, and carrying the discussion on, and doing it in your own unique way. That's important for the collective.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, I just saw all these great people having great discussions, and I thought, I want to talk to these people. I want to be part of this conversation. So thought I'd
Yeah,
start there. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I've wanted to chat to you for ages, so I appreciate it even before this. And yeah, man, I think we should definitely stay in touch going forward and stuff, because I've really enjoyed today's conversation. It's been fun.
definitely. And I'll definitely have you on Engage in the Phenomenon sometime to talk. I think that'd be great. So my listeners can hear some of your perspectives. That'd be awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'd be down. Well, yeah, thank you to everybody listening, and we will catch you next time.